Narito na naman ang mainit na balita mula sa mundo ng politika. Isang nakakagulat na sagupaan ng naganap sa Senado. Si Prof.Clarita, kilalang eksperto sa ekonomiya at madalas na panauhin sa mga pampublikong pagdinig, ay nagwala umano sa isang sesyon ng Senate hearing kanina. Ayon sa mga ulat, nawalan umano ng pasensya si Prof. Clarita sa paulit-ulit na pagtatanong ni Senadora Imee Marcos. Dahilan upang umabot sa tensyonado at emosyonal na eksena. Sa gitna ng tensyon, hindi rin napigilan ni President Cotin ng Norte Jr. ang kanyang emosyon. Isinantabi ang karaniwang disente at mahinaong pananalita. Tila pinatulan ng Pangulo ang komento ni Senadora Imee na kanyang sariling kapatid. Ang hindi inaasahang sagutan ng magkapatid ay umani ng iba't ibang reaksyon mula sa publiko at mga mambabatas na naroroon sa pagdinig. Ayon sa mga insider, nagsimula ang init ng sagupan sa issue ng confidential funds at mga programang pinondohan ng Office of the President. Sa isang punto ng pagdinig, kumalma si Prof. Clarita sa umano'y kakulangan sa transparency at dito na nagugat ang bangayan. Sa gitna ng diskusyon, sinabayan pa ito ng komento ni Sen.Imee na ikinagalit ni President Marcos kaya nagpatutsadahan na ang dalawa. Sa ngayon, wala pang opisyal na pahayag mula sa Malacanang ukol sa insidente, ngunit inaasahang maglalabas ng statement si President Marcos sa mga susunod na oras. Samantala, hinihimok naman ng ilang senador ang kapwa nila mambabatas na panatilihin ang respeto sa mga pagdinig at iwasan ang personalan. Abangan pa ang karagdagang detalye sa mga susunod na ulat. At yan nga ang mga balitang ating pagkakatutukan, at kung bago ka pa lamang sa aking channel ay huwag kakalimutang mag-like, share and subscribe para updated ka sa ating mga bagong balita dito sa Tatak Pinas.
One of the things I put together there would be, ba't mo pa kailangan national strategy? Andiyan na nga yung NEDA plan, sabi ko. Eh, tinuro ko din
First,
siya.
address the biggest problem. 21% of our fellow Filipinos are going to bed hungry.
When is the right time to do it, Dr.
I was saying,
Benitez?
if the president is able to achieve those two targets, bring down the poverty incidence to single digit, which Secretary Balikasan is always saying, that by 2028, we will see a single digit. And how do you do that?
The Supreme Court is the final interpreter of the phrase public utility, because that is the reason for existence of the Supreme Court, to interpret the provisions of the Constitution. Congress cannot take that power away by saying we will interpret it in a law.
Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I was taking down notes earlier as I listened to Senator Poe and Senator Ontiveros, and I'd like to address the issues that they have raised. I think I'd like to take off from the point of view of social scientists who's looking at this from a macro standpoint. So I will not go into the nitty-gritty because all my colleagues here have already addressed many dimensions of the issue. I think the first question of Senator Grace is, do we need to change the Constitution to declare that we're open for business? And the quick and dirty answer there would be no, because you already are making so many legislative actions to open up the economy. But I think the challenge there is it opening up enough, or are we addressing really what we want to happen? Here, I'd like to go into a bit of epistemology, if you don't mind, which is, when you establish something and you say that you know something, that means you have identified the composite of variables which will bring about a particular result, isn't it? Now here, as I listen to the very intelligent comments around the table and those who are joining us virtually, and I noticed that we are not able to categorize our variables into most critical, less critical, and so on. In other words, we don't have an ordinal list where one is first, second, etc. And that one, as I agree with Dr. Fabella, cannot be an article of faith. It has to be empirically grounded. So however much we believe in these things, as a social scientist, if they are not empirically grounded, ay laway lang po yan. Okay, so I think because all the senators have their own research component, I would like them to pay attention to grounding all these claims. It's only if we have the hard evidence, the evidence conditions that will support them, that we can declare that we know something. Because the reason why you will notice we're shooting here, there, and everywhere is because we're not able to categorize them into the most important, less important, etc. Okay, of course, remember I've been part of the cabinet for X number of months as National Security Advisor. One of the things I put together there would be to present to our president in one cabinet meeting, I think it was late October or early November, a national strategy. Why do we need a national strategy? And this is where I had, had to cross swords with one of my colleagues, Dineda had. Sabi niya, ba't mo pa kailangan national strategy? Andiyan na nga yung NEDA plan. Sabi ko, tinuro ko din siya. Sabi ko, bakit naman sa national plan mo wala man lang isang single line then about national security? And because I was the vice chair of the NTFL also at the time, bakit wala man lang din nakatutok tungkol doon sa mga barangay natin at anong gagawin dito sa mga natitira pa na mga influence barangay? Wala talaga doon yan. I mean, i-google ninyo yan at saliksikan nyo yan. Okay, what am I saying? If we're just shooting here, there, and everywhere, and we don't have anything, a big picture that will crochet together, that will stitch together all these things, then we don't know what to do. In terms of konti na nga ang salapi mo, kung saan mo pa nilalagay. Kapag the national strategy ka, pag konti ang salapi mo, alam mo, ito yung number one, yun ang una mong bigyan ng pansin. Ganun din siguro dito, no? Bakit tayo masyadong nag-rely sa foreign investment? What about domestic investment? Hindi ba natin nakita yung sinabi na nga, yung regulatory framework, sinabi ni Dr. Villegas kanina, kahit ang inyong mga domestic investor ay sinasakal din ng over-regulation ng ating gobyerno. Parang ang unang assumption mo ikaw ay magnanakaw, saka mo na i-prove otherwise. No? Bakit ganun? In other words, well, we are so much banking in foreign direct investment. We should also bank on our local investors and talagang bigyan niya sila ng alagwa para talagang magawa nila ang kanilang ginagawa. Bigyan ko kayo ng example, no? My former boss here, Senator Tolentino at the MMDA, I was there with him since 2010 as one of his consultants for the traffic management. Dines namin, Senator, I don't know kung nakwento ko na sa iyo to, kung paano yung bureaucracy natin as identified by other resource persons, no, is really one of the major obstacles to why no investment is coming in. Merong isang gripo dyan na nagtutulo, no? So sabi ko, ang dili naman bumili ng gripo, parang 200 pesos lang. Sabi ko, sundan natin kung paano magbili ng gripo. Alam niyo ba kung gaano yun? 4 na buwan. I-trace namin ito, Senator Tolentino. 4 na buwan at 26 signatures para po makabili ng gripo. Gusto ko lang to make the point na the bureaucracy really matters. You have a Byzantine bureaucracy, and I have seen polls of foreign investors telling you that there are two major things, critical variables that matter to them, are Byzantine bureaucracy and the level of corruption. Yung ownership vote, that they don't matter. By the way, tama si Dr. Fabella. Ownership by Filipinos is an article of faith. It doesn't matter who owns it. Sabi ko nga sa telco, galing pa siya sa Jupiter, basta magpagawa siya talaga ng internet, okay lang. Does ownership matter? No, not anymore. In the university, we're telling our students, we're training you to be citizens of the world. We are breaking down all the boundaries of the artificial nation state. We already made commitments in ASEAN for regional integration. Why, for heaven's sakes, I was always so preoccupied on, keeping the nation state. It's one of the scourges of humanity, if I may say so. So, last point, yung Filipino first po, tama po si Senator Antiveros. Pasain na po yan. It should be rendered obsolescent. No? Bakit Filipino first? Because once upon a time in the past, we tried to, to divest ourselves of all the colonial things that chained us, no, to the former colonial rulers of our country. Huwag na po tayong Filipino first. No one study I have seen thus far has demonstrated quite creditably that ownership by Filipinos work. I challenge anyone here around the table, the social scientists. Meron bang ganyan? Wala po. Ownership doesn't matter. No? But what we really want is, in fact, I had suggested in one of my papers that if our economic managers cannot, in fact, lower or eradicate the 21% of their big leaders na sinabi mo, no, na mga poor, Aba, mag-hire tayo po ng international group of economic managers. We pay them depending on the percentage of increment that they are going to contribute to GDP. I know this is an iconoclastic viewpoint, but for God's sake, we have to be iconoclast now. You know, we are the fifth most mineralized countries in the world. We have millions of professionals. We should be embarrassed that we have 21% who are poor. Tama ba, Dr. Villegas? Tama, di ba? So I think, let me go back to the issue of a national strategy. I address this also to the military. Several times they have asked me to help them design their strategy for the Air Force, for the Philippine Marines, etc. Sabi ko, saan ba kayo nakatukod yung strategy nyo? Meron bang National Defense Plan? O bungang isip nyo lang yan? Saan manggagaling yung National Defense Plan, Senator po? Hindi ba manggagaling yan sa national strategy? Dibuho yan eh. It's a big, big picture. And siguro lastly, sorry sa Senator Angara, medyo nagsosobra na ata ako sa time ko. Senator po, you mentioned something about banning certain countries from ownership. And are you referring to China?
In the Public Service Act, any country that the President or the National Security Council views as a threat to us is actually eliminated from or banned from owning certain critical infrastructure, telecommunications, for example, I believe airports, etc. And also, countries that don't reciprocate or allow us also the same type of ownership in their country would not be allowed. That's what, those are some of the safeguards we put as a compromise to those who are a little bit wary about this Public Service Act being open.
Yeah, with all due respect, I agree with the reciprocity, but the first one I don't. Because if you have a strict regulatory framework, then it can be a to whom it may concern. So I think we should not ban XYZ, whichever country. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Carlos. Senator Risa, yes?
Salamat, Mr. Chair. Just a quick correction for the record. With all due respect, I certainly did not say that Filipino first is a passé policy. In fact,
One
I
of your
believe...
source persons, I stand corrected.
Thank you, ma'am. In fact, I believe that Filipino first is a positive and dynamic principle in formulating and constantly updating our economic policy. And lastly, Mr. Chair, at this point, if 60 to 100% ownership in Filipino hands doesn't matter anyway in the big picture, then let's keep that in Filipino hands and work on the real problems identified both by those opposed to and supportive of RBH 6. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Risa.
Mr. Chair, just a quick comment.
Yes,
I
Senator.
would like to thank also Dr. Carlos for bringing up something that we haven't really discussed in our minds being focused on foreign direct investments. It's true, local businesses are also suffering. What we're trying to do is we're actually hunting in the zoo, like the ones that are complying with the laws, paying taxes, are the ones being audited, while the ones that are in the informal economy getting away with so much, we don't focus our attention on. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Senator Risa, Senator Poe. It's definitely, we're not abandoning the Filipino first. In fact, Congress just passed the TATAK Pinoy strategy, which is an attempt at industrial policy, albeit somewhat belated for the region.
Sponsored and authored by our chairman.
Thank you for the salamat sa patalastas. Thank you. Thank you. We'd like to
Senator, just make a final comment. As a social scientist, I'd like an article of faith to have empirical evidence. We cannot work on an article of faith. Filipino first policy should be rendered obsolescent.
Thank you. Thank you for your opinion. We'd like to hear from Mr. Julian Payne, the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, who's been our guest in the past for the CREATE law and the other investment laws. Morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable senators. I'm going to speak on behalf of the Joint Foreign Chambers of Commerce. Then I will make one brief comment on behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And I have some colleagues here from the European Chamber and the Australia-New Zealand who may wish to add some. First of all, we thank the subcommittee for inviting us to comment on this resolution. We're honored to respond to the committee. The Joint Foreign Chambers of Commerce of the Philippines is a business advocacy coalition. We know that. It supports and promotes open international trade, free investment, and improved conditions of business. That's what we advocate. We don't advocate anything more. That's where we focus. The joint foreign change where such investment is currently restricted. We recognize that the government's mandate and indeed duty in all countries is to protect national interests through some restrictions on FDA. That happens in every country. In this respect, that we note that most national economies, this interest is protected by use of legislation or executive action, not in constitutions. The advantage of using legislation or executive action is that with these forms of regulation, both the legislature and/or the executive can quickly adjust to changing business conditions and the international environment. Whether this is required by changes in technology, treaties, or just new opportunities for business. In recent years, the Congress, in its wisdom, has done just that with respect to amendments of PSA, the Foreign Investment Act, the Retail Sales Legislation Act. Our neighbor country, Indonesia, opened more than 200 sectors to foreign investment, again by the same technique. We have noted various past proposals to remove constitutional restrictions to foreign investment, including removing these altogether, or as an alternative, to insert the phrase, unless otherwise provided by law, as proposed by the resolution, for sectors advertising, basic education, and so on. This second alternative provides the Congress the power to adjust restrictions as it deems necessary. While the second alternative may not be as strong a signal to foreign investment as the first, it makes possible, if the Congress so decides, to further ease restrictions or not, that would facilitate foreign direct investment. The Philippine economy is now more integrated with the global economy than it was over 30 decades ago. The country has joined the WTO, the ASEAN Economic Community, and RCEP most recently. It has free trade agreements with Japan, Korea, European Free Trade Association, and will probably need to negotiate further FTAs, such as with the Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership. To remain competitive and to exploit these opportunities for the Filipinos. Many of these developments emphasize the need for free movement of capital and a level playing field between foreign and domestic investors. And that gets to the core of the question of the economic provision. That is the statement of the JFC. I would like to make one comment on behalf of the Canadian Chamber. It seems to us we have two questions before us, and they're quite distinct. One is the question of restrictions in various sectors or not. This was made a point by Attorney Aguinaldo. It could range from 100% to 0% in any sector. The second question is quite a different one, is where are the restrictions going to be set? In the Constitution or in legislation? Now, the reality of the business world today is things are changing very rapidly. 30 years ago, we did not have online education. We did not have online advertising. The conditions have changed, and they will change faster and faster as we move forward. And I think it's imperative that the committee consider which is the most appropriate body to adjust to and propose restrictions, whether they be 100%, 60-40, or 0. There are two separate questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would ask whether my colleagues wish to add anything. Thank you. Salamat po.
Yes, Mr. Florian Gauthier, the Executive Director of the European Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Mr. Chairman, we're really honored to be here today, and especially we feel privileged as foreigners to speak here in front of this committee. Just to reiterate, basically as European Chamber of Commerce, we fully support the statement that was just done by my colleague Julian Payne. Again, just reiterating that amending the constitution is purely a Filipino matter. that we appreciate that we've been invited. And if the Filipino people decide to amend the constitution, we would actually be in favor of removing the economic restrictions from the constitution. If you look at, again, coming from what my colleague Mr. Payne said, if you look at recent amendments to PSA, to RTLA, FIA, but also the DOJ opinion on the implementing rules and regulations of the Renewable Energy Act, have really created a more conducive business environment for foreign investors to come in. And as you clearly can see also in the last 1.5 years, this has really opened the floodgates for foreign direct investments, in particular also coming from Europe when it comes to renewable energy projects. So you can really see that what is being done here in the Senate and the Congress has really a huge impact also then on how foreign businesses react to it. If I think it was earlier mentioned by Dr. Villegas, this will have the same impact on education and advertising. We don't know. Maybe it's more about the quality of investment there when it comes to education, to improve the level of education or the offer of education here in the country as well, because this is also critical for the competitiveness of the country, as well as then also for our investors here, to have qualified Filipino workers, especially also when it comes to new jobs, green jobs that we don't have yet here in the country. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, just as a follow-up,
Thank you, Mr. Goten. Yes, Senator Poe.
with the foreign chambers, when we passed the PSA, I believe you were quite jubilant about it, right? What's the feedback among in your community when we passed the PSA?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Madam Senator, it was a very positive feeling actually that, you know, after 80+ years, this law has finally been amended. And as I mentioned earlier, it really has contributed to the attractiveness of the Philippines among the foreign investors.
So did you see any improvement in terms of interest and actual investments that came in after it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can just give you an example of the European Chamber. We grew last year by more than 130 members. We are altogether 800 members, and just last year we increased our membership, new foreign investors coming in by 130 new companies.
Is there now concern because of this issue on amending the constitution with regards to our foreign investors being a little bit hesitant because of the issues surrounding this now?
Well, I have to be honest, we got some calls from some of our members following the news and the political debate about how this might unfold or in which direction it could actually move further. So there is some uncertainty out there. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Duarte, would you care to add to that, or is that your position as well?
I represent the European Chamber as well, and I think my colleague Florian already stated. I might add one sentence, is that we are very honored to be here. We understand that is a Filipino debate, and we don't want to be, let's say, deeply involved in promoting solution A or solution B. But we are also very honored that we have the chance to put our positions. So, but in a sense, that this could be an opportunity to awake interest from more foreign investment in the country, knowing that, and I hear we can talk for the European investment. So, from 100% investments in Southeast Asia, only 4% come to the Philippines, and we need to work together to increase this number. And everyone that needs to contribute. The European Chamber from one side to attract, but also the country to accept and welcome foreign investment. So that's my just add-on the topic. Thank you.
Well, that's a useful statistic. Thank you, Sir Duarte. Ms. Duor, care to say anything for the New Zealand and Australian Chamber?
Same position as my fellow JFC colleagues as well. We are very supportive of coming into the country. Australia, New Zealand, especially Australia, now has launched their economic strategic partnership for the next 17 years with Asia up until 2040. So we have also seen an uptick of Australian interest wanting to come over. So same position as stands. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very brief. Dr. Angeles, care to comment on the provisions we have? Yeah.
And perhaps, Dr. Angeles has been a valuable resource during our public services bill hearing. And I would like to hear if perhaps he feels now compelled that we should open up other public services, public utilities, or are we okay so far with the PSA?
Yes, please
Based
go
on
ahead.
your observation.
Please go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Honorable Chair and members of the committee and distinguished individuals in attendance. First, perhaps as regards, first I had the honor of working with Senator Poe and her colleagues regarding the Public Service Act amendments. That law was founded on what we believe to be the appropriate interpretation of the provision, that in fact public utility regulation was focused on the regulation of natural monopolies and their ills, and that the remaining, most of the what were remaining sectors that were classified as public utilities in the Public Service Act amendments were considered to be natural monopolies. Those specifically that are considered by the economic literature to be still natural monopolies would be electric power transmission, distribution, water pipeline distribution sewerage, petroleum distribution through pipeline specifically. As I'm elated to note that from the foreign chambers that this has been helpful. That said, I would like to address a few of the points mentioned earlier. While I understand that Professor Carlos believes that foreign equity restrictions are irrelevant, I would like to address that by 2 points. First, regarding the theoretical literature and empirical literature on control premiums. If, in fact, control was irrelevant, that control would not be worth a premium. And in fact, the financial economics literature has proven that there's in fact a control premium. Number 2, on the theoretical aspects of the legal matters, certainly, I think it's fairly well known that in corporation law, that certain basic fundamental decisions must be taken with 2/3 vote of stockholders, such as amendment of articles of incorporation, as regards sale of all or substantially all of the business, etc. So these are matters which would be certainly important from a theoretical aspect. Now, from the empirical aspect, we have seen that with the Public Service Act amendments, in fact, there has been, and renewable energy IRR amendments, there have been there has been a higher interest in investment, and at the same time, pledges made, which I understand, as Professor Villegas has pointed out, have resulted in at least about $14 billion worth, and that has translated to, and a substantial portion of that was in renewable energy. Now, that said, I would say that, and I will confine myself specifically to the issue of public utilities, I would say that, as you mentioned, as the chairman and has repeatedly mentioned, uncertainty is something that is worth considering. And I think this also mentioned by the joint foreign chambers. Now, it cannot be denied that there are 2 pending Supreme Court petitions challenging the constitutionality of the Public Service Act. And while I believe that the Public Service Act amendments law will pass muster,
That said, the Supreme Court still has the final, is in the end, the final arbiter of the meaning of the Constitution and its metes and bounds. So for that reason, I believe that the amendment adding unless provided by law would be helpful in addressing the uncertainty which the chairperson has in fact pointed out. I also do agree with the good Senator Poe that there are a number of safeguards that our policymakers, our wise policymakers have added, which I think will help to mollify their concerns. One of them is the state-owned enterprise prohibition, which affects public utilities and critical infrastructure. As in fact, it was in fact asked in the last bar exam, not even 1%, there was a proposed 1% investment. But even under that state-owned enterprise prohibition, post-effectivity, there is no state-owned enterprise that can invest in public utilities and critical infrastructure. There are, as you also mentioned, there's a reciprocity provision. And at the same time, there's an information security provision, which requires those engaged in the business operation of telecommunications to secure those relevant international certifications for information security, and prohibits cooperation as regards providing sensitive information, personal information. So if we are to so moving forward, I believe that there are quite a number of salutary provisions there that would help to mollify concerns for foreign investment in these sensitive sectors. May it please the members of the Honorable Committee.
Very much. A lot of useful points there, Dr. Angeles. Senator Poe, I think, wants to interject, and then Dr. Villegas is also raising his hand. So,
I'd like to address my question to our Justice Carpio, having been a member of the Supreme Court as one of the justices. As you know, the Public Service Act is now being questioned before the Supreme Court. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why our chairman here and some of our colleagues would like to strengthen the provisions of the Public Service Act by amending this through the RBH 6. What is your view on it, sir? Is there a legitimate reason why we should go through this process, or do you feel that the Supreme Court will eventually resolve it soon?
Well,
Mr. Chairman,
I'm in favor of.
connected po
is
dun
it
sa...
connected?
Yes.
With your permission, Justice Carpio. Senator
Yes,
Pinatulan, yes.
Mr. Chairman, and would the passage of this resolution make the pending cases in the Supreme Court moot and academic?
Thank you.
Thank you,
Justice.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm in favor of the amendment that we include in the economic provisions the phrase unless otherwise provided by law, but I would like to add subject to reciprocity, just like in the PSA, amended PSA. Now, on the issue in the Supreme Court, I think this would help. If you amend the provision now to add unless otherwise provided by, then that will settle the issue. Because, you know, the way I look at it, the interpretation of public utility is an interpretation reserved for the highest court of the land, because we are interpreting a phrase in the Constitution, and the Supreme Court will always say, we have that authority. Congress cannot decide a case by defining a provision in the Constitution the way they want it. We will say what that provision means, because that is judicial power. So the issue is, does public utility include transportation? Does it include telecommunication? For the longest time, that has been the case. And whenever we say speak of public utility, we always mean transportation, telephone, and that is the way the framers of the Constitution understood it. So it boils down to who can interpret the Constitution finally? The Supreme Court, or can Congress interpret it by legislation? So that is the issue now. If I were in the court, I will say it's the Supreme Court who can interpret the meaning of public utility. But you will say we will define public utility under a law. So there is now a conflict. So to settle that, just add there in the provision of the Constitution, unless otherwise provided by law. That would fix it. Because my position is the Supreme Court is the final interpreter of the phrase public utility. Because that is the reason for existence of the Supreme Court, to interpret the provisions of the Constitution. Congress cannot take that power away by saying we will interpret it in a law. That's exactly the issue now in the Supreme Court. So I'm for this provision, but just to add the phrase subject to reciprocity, because we cannot open our economy to Vietnam, to China, to Indonesia, when they are close to us. I mean, it should be equal, because we are sovereign states. We should be treated like they're co-equals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Carpio. Tama yun. Di dapat tayo magpadugi. Senator Tolentino, on a related point, with your permission, Dr. Villegas.
Chairman, germane to the question of Senator Binay. So in effect, it would be, the question was whether it would render the case moot and academic. The answer implies the proposition that it would have a retroactive, persuasive effect among the members of the bench. Is that the correct interpretation? Your Honor, Justice Carpio?
You add the phrase unless otherwise provided by law. That will solve the problem, because the Constitution itself tells everybody that you can now determine the meaning of public utility.
But the PSA amendment was passed prior to this process. So will that have a bearing on that? If the Supreme Court would release its decision within the next few months, and if looking at if there is a timetable, sans bullying, this would be addressed by a plebiscite within the next few months. How would that jive with the persuasiveness?
Well, I have no idea when they will decide that case. So, but for me, to play it safe, it will be better to put the phrase unless otherwise provided by law. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice.
Thank you very much, Senator. Back to you, Dr. Villegas.
Yes.
I'd like to emphasize the importance of what Mr. Payne asked. Should restrictions, Filipino first, which will always be relevant, be in the Constitution, or should they be legislated? And I'd like to give you a background about why those of us who drafted the Constitution really made our Constitution a series of legislation. I'm the first one to say that sooner or later, we have to amend this very imperfect Constitution of 1987.
That is a very important question, so I would love to hear from you, sir.
Because 1986 was not the appropriate time to write with serenity, peace, and quiet the basic law of the land. The whole nation, including us, were traumatized by the last turbulent years of the dictatorship, and not to mention the revolution. So emotions were high, and the idea was, let's produce a document that will make sure that the dictator will never come back. And so our Constitution is really an anti-Marcos Constitution. And we jam-packed it with so many provisions that you will not find in most basic laws. And that is why one day I would like to see this Constitution amended. The question right now is timing. I'm of the opinion that now is the time. But sooner or later, we must revise and remove all those restrictions and make sure that in a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, we give the legislature precisely the freedom to be flexible.
So we will always debate about Filipino first restrictions, and they will always be necessary. But the question is, should they appear in the basic law of the land?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nancy, yes.
So, Dr. Villegas, parang today is not the right day to change the Constitution.
Yes, I already said why, because we have to first address the biggest problem. 21% of our fellow Filipinos are going to bed hungry.
When is the right time to do it, Dr.
I was saying,
Villegas?
if the president is able to achieve those two targets, bring down the poverty incidence to single digit, which Secretary Banicasan is always saying, that by 2028, we will see a single digit. And how do you do that? I already mentioned. Make sure that we increase the rate of investment to GDP to 30%, and you can do that only because of lack of local capital. This will not be always. Probably when we already are $10,000 capital, we will have enough capital to really implement Filipino first. But I'm talking about the circumstances today. We don't have the capital for Filipinos to invest long-term in these infrastructures. So my feeling is, because I'm optimistic that this administration will be able to achieve their target, probably by 2028, make the plebiscite simultaneous with the national elections. And who knows, probably the next administration